Our last session, it is titled How to Pivot Your Strategy for the Budget Conscious Consumer. So everyone here, right? You're in marketing, you are dealing with changing consumer demands, you are dealing with a lot of lack of confidence, there's inflation, there's just so much going on. And we as marketers, it just makes it so challenging for us to plan our year. So I really wanted to have a conversation about what you guys are doing. But to start, I'd love if you, Jessica, could introduce yourself, Sure. Tell a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Megan, and thanks for having me. Jessica Malloy, VP of Marketing for Marvel Entertainment. And I'm really focused on the marketing of our direct-to-consumer products. And particularly, that means comics and digital comics. We have this flagship product called Marvel Unlimited, which is kind of an all-access comic subscription app. Over the 80 years of Marvel history, over 30,000 comics on there. So lots of stories to tell, a lot of platforms to tell those stories on. And that's what I spend my time doing.
I'm sure all.
But, I should say, Sebastian, that I spend a lot of my time actually.
I hope so.
Actually trying to prevent my daughter from watching a movie's worth of content every day on TikTok. And the way I do that is through screen time app limits. So if you need to cut yourself off, that's how you do it.
This year is a tough year, I think, for most marketers, but still brands are spending, right? Most brands year over year, their budgets are up. But I'd love to talk to you about, budgets are up, but they look different. They look totally different. Where we're spending money is different. It's totally different in 2023 than it was in 2022, 2021, et cetera. So could you talk a little bit about what that makeup looks like now for you versus what it has looked like in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to know everybody, that's doing this. It is an interesting year. I think that, the good thing for Marvel, right, is it is often in the zeitgeist. We have these big, movies and other things that happen around us, right, that we can pulse around those moments, and tie adjacencies to the comics. Plus we release, wonderful new things all the time that we can promote as well. It has been a little bit of a tightrope of spend and performance this year. And so really about pulsing in certain platforms instead of always on. One of the things I think is very different this year than in other years is, sometimes you need to give a platform like the jolt, to stop and then restart. And it never was that way, right? You're always trained, algorithms, they learn and you have to keep it going. And actually I found this year that sometimes you just need to kind of give it the paddles. And to do that, you just change it all up. And you find that, some of the old methodology isn't working the same way today.
That's really interesting. So 5 years ago, right? We didn't have this much of a fractured ecosystem as we have now. So if you're thinking about more of that pulsing strategy, how do you work within that fractured, I'm sorry to call TikTok social after that whole thing, but the
social and entertainment platforms.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to put it in the bucket and don't hate me. How do you deal with, and I'm not just talking about TikTok, YouTube and Snapchat and Reddit and all of these other platforms. How are you dealing with that fractured ecosystem and reaching your consumer and thinking about, things like Corey was talking about and frequency? What is that approach like for you?
I mean, the fractured word of it, it's actually an opportunity, right? Because it gives us more chances to be in different parts of people's lives. And so, luckily, right, we have a very large organic presence on a lot of different platforms. I don't run the organic presence, but I work very closely with the organic presence, and we work in tandem, right? If we're going, when we launched on TikTok for performance, right, it was following a launch of TikTok organically, so we can see what people want and how to kind of follow that thread, so that it's not a shot in the dark every time about what's going to be engaging. What is still challenging is what's going to convert. So I think that top of the funnel part gets a lot easier. The consideration may be slightly easier, but the converting to dollars, for us, that's still something that we, are in a journey, right, to figuring out how to do it best on all these platforms.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. One thing that you mentioned was obviously you have this fandom. And I think that's really important to the success of some of your campaigns and everything. But consumer behavior has changed so much, right? And we are dealing with consumers who have pulled back and they have to refocus on necessities or cutting expenses or cutting things that maybe they previously loved. So how are you dealing with that? Obviously Marvel, I mean, to some it probably is a necessity, but for most, when people are refocusing on things that they need to have multi-use products, you might think of a subscription as an expense to cut, but you guys have not seen that. So I'd love to hear what have you changed? What has changed about your messaging, your strategy, your continued connection with the consumer this year? Like, how have you leaned in more to keep people so engaged?
Well, I guess we used TikTok with its, watch time of a movie to try to convince them to spend less time on TikTok and read more comics. Literacy message? No. I think that we have a bunch of different ways that we're trying to do that, right? I mean, some of it is going to be impulse and, what is the thing that's going to make you want to know more about a character and go deep in the comics. Other parts of it is going to be promotional, right? I mean, I think that the reality of the situation, and as a longtime direct marketer, tried to stay away from too much, discounts or promos or whatever for years and years and years. And 2023 may be a little bit of a game changer for that because, we don't know that balance of elasticity as much right now with inflation and everything happening than we used to. Right? Where you'd be willing to forego some new customers to preserve the integrity of the lifetime value. I think we're all exploring this together and it's no clear answers.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because I don't think it's just you. I'm seeing brands, luxury brands that you would previously never think would do promos or are very, promo focused, or even, like the resale market. I think that's extremely interesting. Just huge fashion houses partnering with The RealReal or ThredUp or whatever it might be. And it's just because we really have to meet the consumer where they are right now. So do you think that this is a forever strategy for Marvel, or are you really just trying to connect with and support consumers where they are at this moment, obviously struggling? Do you feel like you'll eventually kind of pull back on that and go heavier on the brand as things like right themselves? Like, where do you see that?
Yeah, I would hope that we won't have to rely on, I think we're still try to do enough resting as possible, right? But and hopefully we see that change. I think the offset to that is, right, then we have to innovate the product a little bit so that the value that you're getting for something that is a higher priced or without discount changes, so I think there's that's not really the topic of today's conversation, but I think, in order to break that cycle, you're going to have to change some of the equation, on the product side, probably, if we get too reliant on promotional discounts.
I think value is the name of the game for so many people. And then for you, do you see, because you do a lot of these really fandom level, like less direct response, less promo, more just engaging the community. Do you see that uptick when you have those bigger brand moments for Marvel and to connect with people? Do you see it have a direct impact on your CPAs and your conversion volume, or is it more of a long-term play? How does that connect for you?
Yeah, I think it is all of the above, and we do see impact. And, one thing we did last week was we had a many thousand person live virtual event for X-Men's 60th anniversary. And we got some of the best, most iconic creators in the world together for literally a 3-hour session. And we had over 2-hour watch time in this one thing to hear these legends talk about what it was like to make these comics and work on the characters, right? And so, we had people rushing to kind of want to be part of this, right? If they weren't a subscriber, if they had lapsed their subscription, the fan engagement there, but then on Twitter, and TikTok, et cetera, coming out of the event, was huge. So that's definitely like a pillar of our strategy. And, when we do partnerships with other companies like a Fortnite, right? We definitely see an impact on our cost of acquisition, in the halo effect of doing all these things, right? Some things have more or less halo, so.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point. And it's so great to see you guys doing that it's so easy for brands when times get a little bit more challenging, just to cut all of that, right? Cut the brands, cut that engagement, but it's really going to have such a negative effect on your bottom funnel, if you cut off almost the head and the soul of the brand, then you just end up being like a promotional, and that's all you do, promo. So I think it is really important to be able to prove some of those, prove the lift that something like that provides. Right. That leads me to one of the final things I really wanted to talk to you about, which is measurement. Corey and everyone, we're talking about this before. It is, to go back 10 years and we didn't know how lucky we were. And it just, here's your platform attribution and it's wonderful and everyone believes it and it's so great. And it was so easy and our lives were like beautiful and we didn't even know it. But it's not the case anymore, right? And we can't just rely on platform attribution. We can't just say, like, if you just looked at last click, God, I hate that. But if you just looked at last click, you would never do any branding initiatives, right? It wouldn't make financial sense, but we're talking to more clients about incrementality and MMM and really looking at that full funnel. And we're, I think for direct response marketers, it's a little painful because we have to unlearn all of this stuff that we've trained our teams to learn, our CEOs, our CFOs. We've said, this is how you measure, and now we're taking it all back. So I'd love to hear from you. How are you guys looking at attribution? How are you talking about it internally? What was that even journey like to get you guys away from platform attribution and making that your true north? I'd love to hear some of that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is some comedy, right? For if we're all direct response nerds, I imagine in the room, right? That we got to say like, invest money with us because those brand marketers, they can't tell you how their ads are doing, but we can, right? And now here we are being like, well, we can kind of tell you how our ads are doing. I will be the first to admit we are still working on what the right strategy is here. Certainly you can't look at last click attribution that way. But there is an inherent timing issue that is in this conversation around looking at, holistic business, right? Because if it takes more than a week for a TikTok consumer to convert, I'm in a position where my spend in a given week is going to be measured. Even if I look at it at the highest level, total spend and total customers, I'm going to have a missing piece of information. And I'm going to ask my bosses to have more patience in my budget when they don't see the direct response, the direct results. And so that's where it gets challenging. So we've certainly moved it to be more of like a blended view of marketing, right? And that I can get everyone to buy in on. But where I struggle is if it's going to be super delayed or, we have to be more patient than it can be probably, a week. Corey and I did a different talk recently and I committed to being 5 days patient to him, which I have done since then. But, so I think that's the challenge, right? We can easily make the story that we should look at the total numbers and the total success of the business against each other. It's when it doesn't line up that, that's where we still have to figure, 3 months from now, you can look back and say, oh, it did a great job. But in today's, business environment, it's hard to get that kind of allowance.
Yeah. Asking for patience from finance right now is not a fun conversation. And I'm sorry for all the marketers out there having to do that. So what do you think so for brands out there that are still like, I haven't even gotten to say, let's look at a week at a time, right? There's still platform, GA, whatever it is. What was that first step to get the conversation started with your boss or your boss's boss or finance to get them to start thinking about it a little differently? Like, how did you approach it? How would you recommend people approach it? Because I'm sure these are maybe tips people could take from you and say, okay, I can include that in my reporting or the way I am positioning this internally.
Yeah, totally. I mean, well, hopefully everyone, leadership, right, is aware of all the attribution loss of, the 2 years since iOS 14 came off. So I think that, being like, making sure that leadership knows everything that's happening and the continued loss of attribution that's coming is part of it. At some point, we just started introducing some parallel metrics to show kind of like, right, where we would look at a performance spend metric only. Let's look at the total and see, okay, well, performance looked pretty bad this week, but look, overall looks pretty much the same. So, we didn't do anything out of the ordinary in another channel that would have driven that. So, hey, attribution loss is real. Here we have the thing. And maybe we can start moving towards looking at that, the more blended number to say, it seems like everything's okay. And if we were going to fall or higher or below a certain threshold, that's when we look at pulling back spend, right? So a little more allowance on the day to day with some fail-safe measures so that performance doesn't go awry.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, and Sebastian almost brings me back to, you said you can't just go to, MMM right away. First, you start with the basics, and once you have the basics and everybody buys into the basics, you just keep the education going, you keep that conversation going. In your ideal world, where would you be? What would be like your ideal, like, oh, this would be my dreamland, that this is how we measure everything?
I mean, I think like the blended, but on a lag, like if I could get like if we were like making spend decisions for the next 3 months on the prior 3 months, that would be great. But, I don't see that happening anytime soon in my company.
Here. Like this is just us dreaming, there's like unicorns in the background.
Yeah. I think it's also, full customer lifecycle analytics, is also a journey. And so in my ideal world, right, you would have a lot more metrics other than even just the cost of acquisition and a general sense of retention to compare, right? And I think other people may have a lot more advanced solutions, but that's something that we're still in the journey of figuring out.